Backstage, under hot lights and colder smiles, a sharp voice cut Bumpy Johnson down, mocking his strength loud enough for witnesses. Men shifted, expecting blood. Bumpy didn't flinch. He just looked up. The corridor behind the theater was narrow, painted the color of old milk, scarred by hurried shoes and nervous shoulders. Heat from the stage leaked through the walls in slow pulses. Bumpy Johnson moved through it the way a man moves through his own street, unbothered, unhurried, eyes taking account without asking permission. His coat sat right. His hat stayed in. His hand brimming with quiet courtesy. Two of Bumpy's men followed a half step behind, not crowding, not posturing. Their presence was a simple fact. A door ahead opened and spilled a slice of noise. Laughter, clapping, a bright voice rising above it. Then it shut, and the hallway returned to hush. A promoter waited there, thin as wire, hair slicked too carefully. He wiped his hands on his trousers. "Mr. Johnson," he said, stretching a smile too wide. "Didn't expect you so early." Bumpy stopped close enough to make the man feel him, not close enough to touch. He looked at the promoter's eyes, then his hands, then back. "You sent for me," Bumpy said. The promoter nodded too many times. Yes, sir. It's just tonight's a big night. Important people. We're trying to keep everything smooth." Smooth? That was what men asked for when they didn't want to pay for what they started. "What room?" Bumpy asked. "Back here." The promoter hurried ahead, walking fast, shoulders tight. They passed stacked crates marked fragile, a mirror leaning against the wall with a crack like lightning. In the mirror's broken angle, Bumpy caught his own reflection eyes. Steady, face set in patient strangers misread. The promoter stopped at a second door. Two men in dark suits stood there. Their shoes were too clean for work. They watched Bumpy like a rumor. One suit started to speak. The promoter cut in. "He's expected," the promoter said quickly. "Mr. Johnson is a guest." Guest. The word sat wrong. Bumpy didn't correct it. The suit opened the door and stepped aside with stiff politeness. Bumpy walked in. The room was a dressing room dressed up as a parlor. A tray of glasses nobody touched. Bulbs around the mirror so bright they turned every face into something sharp. 3 men were inside. One wore a tuxedo jacket with a soft sheen and a hard mouth. Another held a cigarette between fingers that trembled slightly, though his smile tried to act amused. The third stood by the window, looking at a brick wall. When Bumpy entered, their talk stopped on a dime. The tuxedo man rose slowly and offered his hand like he was doing Bumpy a favor. Bumpy looked at it and let the moment stretch until the man felt it in his wrist. Then Bumpy shook once firm, brief, final. "I don't come for favors," Bumpy said. "Of course." The tuxedo man replied, smile tight. "Please, sit." Bumpy set his hat on the table beside the untouched glasses, placing it carefully. He remained standing. The cigarette man let out a quick laugh. "That's Harlem," he said, half to the room. "Always got to make an entrance." Bumpy's eyes went to him. The laugh died. Smoke drifted up. The tuxedo man cleared his throat. "We'll be direct. There's a visitor tonight. Big name. International. People are excited." Bumpy's face didn't change. "So?" The window man spoke, without turning. "So you keep your people in check. No misunderstandings. No demonstrations." "My people are always in check," Bumpy said. "It's other people that get loose." That landed. The tuxedo man shifted, annoyed but careful. "This is business, not pride." Bumpy's voice stayed. Even. Pride is what makes men do foolish things in front of witnesses. The cigarette man leaned forward, trying for friendly. "You know how it is. A champion comes through, everyone wants a piece. Handshakes, photographs, a little talk." Bumpy glanced at the mirror lights. Talk is cheap, he said. The tuxedo man inhaled. There's been chatter that you've been telling people you're the strongest man in any room you walk into. Bumpy didn't blink. I don't tell people things they can see. Silence spread. The men looked at one another, measuring distance. From the wall came a muffled cheer, something on stage hitting its mark. The promoter's shadow lingered near the doorframe, afraid to enter, afraid to leave. Bumpy noticed him anyway. He noticed everything: the way the tuxedo man's cufflinks flashed, the way the cigarette man kept swallowing, the way the window man stood like a judge with no robe waiting for Bumpy to show temper. Bumpy angled his head, listening. If you brought me here to repeat gossip, he said, you wasted my time. The window man finally turned. His eyes were sharp, hungry for a reaction. Not gossip, he said. A warning. Some men don't like being looked at as ordinary. Bumpy met his stare. Then they should behave extraordinary. Another cheer rose outside. A laugh, high, confident, echoed down the hallway for a second before fading. It carried an edge, like someone enjoying the room before he entered it. Bumpy's eyes moved to the door. The tuxedo man watched him and spoke softer, almost pleading. Tonight, Mr. Johnson, just be a gentleman. Bumpy's mouth barely moved. I've been a gentleman all my life, he said. That's why people confuse me for something safe. He lifted his hat off the table and held it again like a calm decision. And when does your visitor arrive? The theater noise faded behind him, but Harlem never did. Even in borrowed buildings, even in polished districts that tried to smell richer than they were, Harlem traveled with Bumpy Johnson the way a shadow travels with a body silent, attached. Undeniable. He stepped out through a side exit into the night air. It was cooler, calmer, honest. Streetlight washed the pavement in amber. A black car waited at the curb, engine low, patient. One of his men opened the rear door. Bumpy paused before entering, eyes drifting down the street, not searching, just measuring. He saw a couple arguing softly near a lamppost. A newspaper boy, stacking unsold copies. A drunk laughing alone at nothing. He saw what needed protection. He slid into the car. Inside, the leather smelled worn but cared for. The driver pulled off without being told. They knew his silences by now. For a few blocks, no one spoke. Then the man beside him, Eli, broad-shouldered, eyes always half-narrowed like he was studying trouble, cleared his throat. You want us inside? Eli asked. Already inside, Bumpy said. Eli nodded once. That meant men were positioned. Not loud, not visible. Just present. Like pillars holding up a ceiling no one noticed until it cracked. You hear what they saying? Eli asked. Bumpy watched the streetlights pass across the window. I heard enough. They think this man, this fighter, he bigger than the room. Bumpy didn't answer immediately. He adjusted his cuff, smoothing fabric that was already smooth. Everybody bigger than the room, he said at last. Until the room closes on M. Eli leaned back slightly, absorbing that. Harlem didn't measure strength the way arenas did. Not by speed, not by fists. Harlem measured what a man did when somebody weaker needed him. Measured how many mothers slept easier, because his name existed. Measured who ate because he made sure food reached the block. That weight sat on Bumpy's shoulders. The way his coat did, natural, tailored, never shrugged off. The car turned onto a busier avenue. Neon signs blinked half-tired promises. Jazz bled out of a club door somewhere down the block. Bumpy watched men laughing on the sidewalk. Watched women stepping carefully around puddles. Watched shopkeepers closing shutters with the kind of caution learned from experience. All of them lived inside the radius of his decisions. You know why they nervous? Bumpy asked quietly. Eli shook his head. They think strength is noise. Bumpy said. So when they hear quiet, they imagine weakness. Eli let out a breath through his nose. You want us to remind him different? Bumpy's eyes stayed forward. No. That answer carried more weight than a yes. The car slowed. Near a corner where three young boys stood under a flickering street lamp. One of them noticed the car, nudged the others. They straightened instinctively. Respect wasn't taught, it was absorbed. Bumpy tapped the glass lightly. The driver rolled it down a few inches. One boy stepped forward, cautious but proud. "V'evenin', Mr. Johnson." "Evenin'," Bumpy replied. "You staying out of trouble?" The boy nodded fast. "Yes, sir." Bumpy studied him, not suspicious, just invested. "Make sure trouble stay out of you too." "Yes, sir." The car rolled on. Eli watched that exchange with the faintest smile. "That's what they don't understand," he said. "They don't need to," Bumpy replied. "Understanding ain't required for respect." They rode another block in silence before the driver spoke from the front. "Message came while you was inside." Bumpy's eyes lifted slightly. "From who?" "Club owner. Says the visitors people been talking. Loud." Eli shifted. "Talkin'. How?" Driver kept his eyes on the road. "Saying nobody in this city could last around with him. Saying strength here is just reputation." The words hung in the car like smoke. Eli's jaw tightened. "You want me to handle that before it spreads?" Bumpy shook his head once. "Let it spread." Eli looked at him sideways, surprised. "Rumors travel faster than truth," Bumpy said. "So when truth arrives, it lands heavier." The car slowed again, this time outside a brownstone that looked like every other on the block, except for the men stationed nearby who pretended not to be stationed at all. Bumpy stepped out. Night. In Harlem felt different. It recognized him. Windows softened. Voices lowered without fear, just awareness. He walked up the steps and inside. The room he entered wasn't fancy. Wooden table. 2 chairs. A lamp casting steady light. Maps pinned to a wall, not of countries, but of streets, corners, businesses, churches, schools. Territory not for profit but for responsibility. 2 men already waited inside. Older, seasoned. They didn't stand when he entered. They didn't need to. Respect had already been exchanged years ago. One of them, Marcus, spoke first. "We heard." Bumpy removed his coat slowly, placing it over the chair. "People always hear before anything happens." Marcus folded his hands. "This different. This public." The second man, Jonah, added, "Young ones watching. They see somebody mock you. They question structure." Bumpy sat. He didn't rush his response. He poured himself a drink from the bottle on the table but didn't sip it yet. Just held it, thinking. "Structure don't shake from words," he said. "It shakes when leaders react like children." Marcus nodded slowly. Jonah leaned forward. "Still, you plan to answer it?" Bumpy finally took a sip. "Yes," he said. "How?" Marcus asked. Bumpy set the glass down with deliberate care. "Same way I answer everything." The men waited. Bumpy's eyes lifted, steady as stone. Calm. Silence filled the room, not empty, but assured, because they knew what calm meant when it came from him. It didn't mean avoidance. It meant inevitability. Outside, somewhere in the distance, the theater crowd roared again, another performance reaching its peak. But in this room, the real performance hadn't started yet, and everyone present understood. One thing without saying it, tonight wasn't about fighting. It was about hierarchy. And by sunrise, the city would know exactly where it stood. They returned through a door meant for men who paid to be unseen. The corridor smelled of powder, sweat, and stage paint. A young attendant started to speak, saw Bumpy's face, and chose silence. Backstage was busy with movement that existed to look important. Cables dragged, hems adjusted. An instrument tuned again and again like a nervous prayer. All of it happened around Bumpy, not to him. He moved through it the way a stone moves through water. The current learned his shape and went around. At the far end, a door stood open to a wider room. Laughter spilled out, bright, sharp, careless. It did not belong to men who lived by consequences. It belonged to men who believed consequences were for other people. Eli leaned in. He in there. Bumpy nodded once and stepped inside. The room was dressed like an after-hours salon, a rug. A low table with tea and liquor, both untouched. Folding. Chairs set in a loose circle. Mirror bulbs turned every face pale, every eye too exposed. It was crowded, but it wasn't full of strength. It was full of audience. On the left stood the tuxedo man from earlier, smiling like he'd been rescued. Near him, the promoter hovered, hands clasped, praying to remain unnoticed. Several suits lined the wall, arms crossed, faces blank. 2. Men in silk shirts whispered like gamblers counting somebody else's money. And in the center, balanced on the edge of a chair as if it were a stage, sat Bruce Lee. He was smaller than the posters made him. But the room leaned toward him anyway. Not because of size, because of certainty. Back straight, shoulders loose, hands resting like they had nothing to prove. Hair neat. Eyes bright with amusement that never asked permission. A man beside him laughed too loudly at something Bruce had said, then checked the room to make sure it was heard. Bruce's gaze lifted. He saw Bumpy. The smile on Bruce's mouth didn't vanish. It sharpened. The room felt it before a word. Conversations thinned. Shoulders stiffened. The air became watchful, like a table when someone sits down with too much money. Bumpy walked forward 2 steps and stopped. Not at the edge, not in the middle. In the exact place where nobody could pretend he wasn't there. Bruce looked him over with clean interest, then nodded, casual, like granting a small kindness. So, Bruce said, voice smooth, this is him. The tuxedo man began, Mr. Lee, this is, I know who he is, Bruce cut in, still smiling. They told me. Bumpy's expression stayed level. People talk too much. In my world, Bruce said, talk is part of fighting. You learn the man before you touch him. In my world, Bumpy replied, you learn the man by what he don't say. A few men shifted their feet. A suit near the door swallowed hard. Bruce leaned back, relaxed. I hear you are strong, he said, and the word came out polite. The way a joke comes out polite. Very strong. The promoter laughed, quick and thin, trying to turn it friendly. Bumpy let the laugh die alone. Strong enough, Bumpy said. Bruce's eyes glittered. Strong enough for what? Bumpy's gaze traveled the room. Men hungry for a story, men frightened of being inside one. Strong enough to carry what I carry, he said. Strong enough to keep my people standing. Bruce nodded, as if listening to a student. People, he repeated. Interesting. Where I come from, the man is alone. A silk-shirted man tried to add, Mr. Lee trains alone, like a machine. Bruce didn't look at him. The man quieted. Bruce's attention stayed on Bumpy. They also told me something else, he said. They told me you think nobody can beat you. The room held its breath. Bumpy's voice stayed low. I don't think about beating. Bruce laughed soft, confident. Then what do you think about? Keeping order, Bumpy said. Order had no shine. It wasn't meant to entertain. It was a word that came with receipts. Bruce smiled again, but something harder sat behind. He tapped his fingers on his knee, lightly, like a drummer waiting for the band. I have seen strong men, Bruce said. Men who lift iron, men who break boards, he mimed a snap. They are strong until they meet speed. A few men chuckled, not because it was funny, because they sensed permission. Bruce leaned forward. Do you know what speed is? Bumpy. didn't blink. Speed is what boys rely on when they don't have patience. A murmur moved through the room. That answer made the game dangerous. Bruce's smile tightened. Patience, he said. Yes, I have patience too. He stood. Slowly, graceful, practiced. When he stood, eyes rose with him. Even the suits leaned in. He took one step toward Bumpy, not close enough to touch, close enough to claim space. You are calm, Bruce said, voice quieter. I respect calm. But calm is not the same as power. Bumpy's face stayed still. Depends who you ask. Bruce turned his head slightly, smiling to the watchers. Who here thinks calm can stop a punch? A few men laughed. One suit didn't. The promoter's eyes darted toward the door, measuring exits. Bruce faced Bumpy again. The smile on his mouth became a blade. You think you can fight me? Bruce asked. The room fell silent, not quiet silent, as if a hand covered the building's mouth. Even the distant music seemed to fade, swallowed by expectation. Eli tensed behind Bumpy. The men along the wall stiffened like they'd been given orders without words. A chair creaked somewhere, loud as a gunshot. Everyone waited for Bumpy to surge forward, to swing, to prove something in front of witnesses. They waited for a story they could carry out into the streets like a trophy. Bumpy did not move. He looked at Bruce Lee the way he looked at a corner in Harlem, assessing, understanding, deciding. In that pause, Bumpy heard Harlem clearer than the theater. He heard church doors opening early, the scrape of storefront gates, the soft barter of women stretching $1 into a meal. He remembered boys on corners who borrowed his name like a coat against winter. None of those people cared about trophies or applause. They cared about whether a man could be trusted to keep his temper leashed when the whole room begged for it to snap. Behind him, Eli's hand hovered near his jacket, not reaching, not shaking, waiting for a signal that would never be given. Lightly, a younger suit on the wall shifted his weight and stopped, realizing movement could be mistaken for permission. Even Bruce's friends went still, as if the air itself had turned into glass. Nobody wanted to be first. When he spoke, his voice was almost gentle. Son, he said, I don't fight for sport. Bruce's eyes narrowed, amused. Then, why fight at all? Bumpy's gaze slid past him, taking in the men watching, the men praying, the men hoping, then returned, calm as a courthouse. I fight when order is threatened, Bumpy said. And I never fight in a room I don't own. The words landed like a door locking. Bruce's smile cracked for the first time. He'd expected pride. He'd expected an animal he could provoke. He stepped closer, testing the boundary. This room, he said softly, does it belong to you? Bumpy didn't answer. He adjusted his cuffs low, deliberate like a man preparing for weather. Then he lifted his eyes, and the room, sensing something move beneath the surface, leaned forward. Into the quiet, waiting to learn whose silence was heavier. The silence that followed did not break. It dissolved. Not with laughter. Not with violence. With movement. Bruce Lee stepped back first, though he did it lightly, as if he had never leaned in at all. His smile returned, polished, controlled. A performer resetting his stance when the audience misread the act. Well, he said, clapping his hands once, easy. Then we understand each other. Some men laughed in relief, too loudly, too fast. The promoter exhaled so deeply his shoulders dropped an inch. But the air had changed because mockery, once spoken, did not vanish. It settled. It traveled. It waited for a response, not in the moment, but afterward, where reputations were carved. Not entertained. Bumpy didn't stay. He picked up his hat from the table where he'd placed it earlier, dusted an invisible speck from the brim, and turned for the door. No farewell. No acknowledgement. His exit carried more authority than his entrance. Eli fell in beside him. The suits parted without being told. Once the door closed behind them, the noise of the room resumed, but softer, cautious, like men talking in a house where someone had died recently. The hallway felt cooler. They walked without speaking until they reached the side. Exit again. Outside. Harlem's night wrapped around them, steady, familiar, patient. Eli spoke first. "You want word sent?" Bumpy placed his hat on his head, adjusting it with measured precision. "Word already sent." Eli frowned slightly. "We didn't say." "Nothing." Bumpy stepped toward the waiting car. "Present says enough." They got inside. The driver pulled off slow, giving the moment room to breathe. For 3 blocks, nobody spoke. Then Eli turned. "Men gonna talk about what happened in there?" "They should," Bumpy said. "They gonna say he challenged you." Bumpy looked out the window, watching neon flicker across his reflection. "Let him say it. They gonna say you walked away." Bumpy nodded once. "I did." Eli's voice lowered. "Some gonna call that weakness." Now Bumpy looked at him, not angry, not offended, just direct. "Anybody who calls restraint weakness," he said, "ain't never had power to restrain." Eli absorbed that slowly. The car rolled through Harlem streets that knew their tires. Shop lights dimmed. Night vendors packed away their goods. A radio played blues through an open window somewhere above. Word was already moving, not because Bumpy spread it, but because rooms like that leaked stories the way cracked pipes leaked water. By midnight, bartenders would be repeating the insult. By dawn, it would sound bigger than it was. By noon, boys on corners would argue about who disrespected who. Reputation did not live in truth. It lived in interpretation. And Bumpy understood. Interpretation better than most. The car stopped outside a corner social club that didn't advertise its name. Light glowed behind drawn curtains. 2 men at the entrance nodded as Bumpy stepped out. Inside, the room hushed instantly. Not out of fear, out of alignment. Cigars paused mid-air. Dice froze on felt. A card dealer held his breath without realizing it. Marcus and Jonah sat at a back table, already waiting. Bumpy walked over and sat without removing his coat this time. Marcus leaned forward. "We heard enough to know it was loud." Jonah added, "Boys outside already arguing about it." Bumpy poured himself a drink, slower than before. "He mocked you?" Marcus asked. Bumpy nodded once. "In public?" "Yes." Jonah's jaw tightened. "That spreads." "It's spreading now," Bumpy said calmly. Marcus studied his face. "You ain't angry." Bumpy lifted the glass but didn't drink yet. "Anger is expensive," he said. "I don't spend it where it don't profit." Jonah leaned in. "Still, this touches authority." Bumpy set the glass down untouched. "Yes," he said, "it does." The table fell quiet around them. Men pretended to return to their games, but every ear leaned toward Bumpy's chair. Marcus spoke carefully. "You planning correction?" Bumpy rested his hands on the table, fingers relaxed but grounded, already in motion. Jonah's brow furrowed. "How if you walked away?" Bumpy's eyes lifted, steady. "Walking away is motion," he said. "It creates distance. Distance creates perspective. Perspective creates fear." Marcus's lips curved slightly. He understood. Jonah leaned back, thinking it through. "So you let the insult grow." "Until it collapses under its own weight," Bumpy finished. A man at the next table accidentally dropped a chip. The sound cracked through the quiet. He froze, embarrassed, then quickly gathered it, because everyone in that room knew something had begun. Bumpy finally took a sip of his drink. "Send word," he said. Marcus straightened. "To who?" "To everybody that was in that room tonight." Jonah asked, "What word?" Bumpy's voice stayed even, but it carried iron underneath. "Tell 'em I don't fight exhibitions." Marcus nodded slowly. And if they ask why? Jonah pressed. Bumpy's eyes moved across the clubmen who trusted him with their safety, their income, their family's peace. Tell them, Bumpy said. A ruler don't box for applause. Silence spread again, but this time it felt heavier, settled, final, because the insult had been public. But the response? The response was being built in private, and private responses were the ones that reshaped reputations permanently. Outside, a police siren wailed somewhere far off, then faded. Night traffic thinned. Harlem exhaled into early morning rhythm. Bumpy stood. The entire club rose with him, not instructed, not rehearsed. Just instinct. He adjusted his coat, placed cash on the table for a drink he barely touched, and headed for the door. Before stepping out, he paused, not to speak, just to let the room feel his stillness one more time. Because stillness, when held by the right man, felt louder than violence. And by sunrise, every man who witnessed that dressing room would understand something they didn't understand yet. Mockery could start a story, but only authority decided how it ended. Morning didn't rush Harlem. It arrived the way truth arrived, slow, deliberate, unavoidable. By the time the sun touched the tops of the brownstones, the story had already grown legs. It moved through barbershops, diners, club backrooms, loading docks. Some told it with excitement, some with worry, a few with quiet admiration. Bruce Lee mocked him, challenged him, asked if he could fight, and Bumpy Johnson walked away. But what people argued about wasn't the insult. It was the walk, because men who understood power knew walking away publicly was not retreat. It was positioning. Late morning, a black sedan rolled to a stop outside the same theater. Not through the front where posters hung. Through the service entrance where deliveries and decisions entered unseen. Bumpy stepped out alone this time. No Eli. No entourage. Just him. Inside, the corridors were quieter than the night before. Workers moved slower, voices softer. Word had reached them, too. They watched him pass the way citizens watch a judge enter a courthouse, aware something official was about to happen. He didn't knock on the dressing room door. He opened it. Bruce Lee stood near the mirror, stretching his shoulders, movements precise, controlled. Two men from his circle lingered nearby, talking low. When the door opened, all three looked up. Bruce's eyes sharpened, not surprised, but interested. Like a man who had expected a sequel to the night before. Mr. Johnson, he said, relaxed. Back for a match? His friend smirked lightly. Bumpy closed the door behind him with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. I came for clarity, Bumpy said. Bruce tilted his head. Clarity about what? Bumpy walked further into the room, unhurried. Hands visible, posture neutral. He stopped not close enough to threaten, close enough to command attention. You asked me a question last night, Bumpy said. Bruce smiled faintly. I asked many questions. You asked if I thought I could fight you. Bruce's smile widened slightly. Yes, I did. The two men behind him leaned forward, expecting heat, expecting a delayed eruption. Bumpy's voice stayed low. I thought about it. Bruce chuckled. And? Bumpy met his eyes. I decided the question was misplaced. Bruce's amusement paused for a fraction of a second. Misplaced? Yes. Bumpy moved to the table, poured himself tea from the pot as if he owned the room. Steam curled between them. You're a fighter, Bumpy said. You train for combat. You measure men by fists, speed, endurance. Bruce nodded once. Correct. Bumpy lifted the cup but didn't drink yet. I measure men differently. Bruce crossed his arms. How? Bumpy took a sip before answering. I measure what happens after the room empties. The sentence hung heavier than a threat. Bruce studied him more closely now, not amused, Not mocking, calculating. Bumpy set the cup down gently. You wanted to test strength, he said. So I tested yours. Bruce's brow lowered slightly. You didn't do anything. Bumpy's eyes didn't leave his. I walked away. Silence pressed in. Bruce waited for explanation. Bumpy gave it calmly. I let you speak in front of witnesses. I let the room decide what they saw. A fighter looking for applause and a ruler refusing it. One of Bruce's men shifted uncomfortably. Bruce's expression hardened a degree. You think walking away is dominance? Bumpy shook his head lightly. No. Walking back in the next morning is. The words settled deep. Bruce didn't answer immediately because he understood something now that he hadn't measured the night before. Bumpy wasn't operating inside the same arena. Bruce fought men. Bumpy governed consequences. Bumpy stepped closer, not aggressive, not hurried, just present enough that the room had to acknowledge him. You challenged me in a room full of spectators, Bumpy said. But strength ain't proven in exhibitions. Bruce held his ground. Where is it proven then? He asked quietly. Bumpy's voice dropped a shade lower. In whether a man can insult you and still need your permission to operate in your city. The temperature in the room changed, not from anger, from realization. Bruce's friends glanced at each other. The theater, the bookings, the partnerships. All of it ran through networks they didn't control. Bruce looked at Bumpy for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Not submission, recognition. I see, Bruce said. Bumpy adjusted his cuff again, small, precise. I don't fight for pride, he said. I fight for order. And order was never threatened by you. Bruce's mouth curved. Slightly, not mocking now, but respectful. Then we never had a conflict, Bruce said. Bumpy lifted his hat from the table. We never did. He turned for the door. Before exiting, he paused, not looking back, just speaking into the space. You're fast, he said. I respect that. Bruce allowed a faint smile. And you're calm, Bruce replied. I respect that too. Bumpy opened the door, and calm, he said, is what keeps cities standing. He left without another word. No fight, no spectacle, no applause. But by the time he reached the street, the hierarchy of the night before had reversed completely, because Bruce Lee had challenged a fighter and met a ruler instead. By evening, the story had finished changing shape, not the way gossip usually twisted things, but the opposite. It sharpened, clarified, settled into a version that carried weight instead of noise. Men who had been in that dressing room spoke quieter when they retold it. They didn't describe fists. They described stillness. They didn't talk about speed. They talked about presence. Bruce Lee's name still carried admiration. It always would. A fighter respected for mastery of body, but Bumpy Johnson's name left that night heavier than it entered, because he hadn't defended pride. He had defended structure. In barbershops, older men explained it to younger ones in simple terms. Fighter proves himself once. A ruler proves himself every day. No retaliation came. None was needed. The promoter stayed respectful. The theater doors stayed open. Bruce's visit continued without obstruction because Bumpy never sought to crush talent, only disorder, and that restraint became the real story. Weeks later, when the night was mentioned, it wasn't framed as a challenge. It was framed as a lesson. That strength could roar, but authority only had to whisper, and Harlem remembered which one kept the streets steady. Bumpy Johnson's legacy didn't grow from battles won in rooms full of witnesses. It grew from moments like this, where silence, discipline, and inevitability ruled louder than violence ever could.